Caleb Whitaker only wanted a quiet dinner with his 9-year-old daughter, June, after a long day repairing heating systems at her school. Wearing dusty work clothes, he looked like any hard-working dad trying to buy his child a simple meal. But within minutes, they were told there were no tables, forced to watch wealthier guests walk past them, and finally thrown out after Caleb defended an elderly delivery driver who had been treated without dignity. Instead of arguing, Caleb made one calm phone call that froze every register, every reservation, and every record inside the restaurant. Before the night was over, the people who judged him by his appearance would discover they had spent the evening humiliating the man who owned the building. And Caleb would have to decide whether justice meant revenge, or giving people one final chance to choose who they wanted to become. The warm amber lights of copper and pine spilled across the wet sidewalk, making the rain-soaked street glow like polished brass. Friday night had filled the dining room with the familiar rhythm of clinking glasses, quiet laughter, and the steady murmur of conversations drifting through the front windows. Caleb Whitaker paused outside for only a second. His faded blue work jacket still carried a thin layer of dust from replacing a heating unit at June's elementary school that afternoon. His boots were scratched, his hands rough, and there was still a faint streak of grease near one wrist he hadn't managed to wash away. Beside him, 9-year-old June adjusted the worn steel lunchbox she carried carefully against her side. "You think they still make that tomato soup?" she asked with a hopeful smile. Caleb smiled back. "I'd be disappointed if they didn't." He opened the door, letting the smell of fresh bread and grilled herbs wrap around them. Behind the hostess stand, a young woman with a perfectly pressed uniform looked up without smiling. "Table for two," Caleb said politely. Her eyes traveled slowly over his jacket, his boots, the lunchbox in June's hands. "I'm sorry," she replied flatly. "We're completely booked tonight." Caleb glanced past her shoulder. Half a dozen empty tables waited beneath hanging lights. "I don't mind waiting a few minutes," he said gently. "Those look available." "They're reserved." Her answer came too quickly. Before Caleb could respond, the front door opened again. A well-dressed family entered behind them. The father slipped something into the hostess's hand so naturally it almost disappeared between their palms. A small white envelope. She smiled immediately. "Right this way." Without checking a reservation, without looking at a screen, she picked up 2 menus and escorted them toward one of the very tables she had just claimed was unavailable. June watched them disappear into the dining room. Then she looked back at her father. "Dad," he already knew the question. "Why did they get a table?" Caleb kept his voice calm. "I don't know yet." The answer seemed to satisfy her less than it satisfied him. Near the kitchen entrance, a loud voice suddenly cut through the room. "I told you deliveries come through the back." An older man wearing a reflective delivery jacket struggled with 2 heavy food crates. Gray hair peeked from beneath his cap. Rainwater dripped from his sleeves onto the hardwood floor. "My tire blew out," the driver said quietly. "I came as fast as I could." Manager Travis Keene stepped closer. "I don't care what happened to your tire. I just need someone to sign these. You made us late. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't keep this place running." Several nearby employees pretended not to hear. The older man shifted the weight of the crates, breathing harder now. "Could I please get a glass of water first?" "No." Travis didn't hesitate. "Unload your truck somewhere else if you're tired." June looked up at Caleb. The expression on her face changed before she spoke. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was concern. Caleb walked forward. "I'll help him." The older driver looked surprised as Caleb lifted one side of the crate without saying another word. Together, they lowered it carefully onto the floor. Caleb unscrewed the cap from his own water bottle. "Here." The driver accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." Travis's jaw tightened. "Sir." His tone had turned sharp. "This doesn't involve you. It involves someone who's asking for water. It involves my restaurant." Caleb looked at him quietly. "No. It involves how people are treated." For a brief second, nobody moved. Silverware stopped halfway to mouths. A nearby waitress froze beside a table. Even the music suddenly seemed quieter. Travis stepped closer. "If you're not eating here, you need to leave." I'd like to understand why he can't have a drink after carrying your delivery. I don't owe you an explanation." Before Caleb could answer, a security guard approached. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step outside." June immediately reached for her father's sleeve. "Dad," Caleb placed one reassuring hand over hers. "It's okay." The guard gently, but firmly, took Caleb by the arm. The older delivery driver opened his mouth as if he wanted to protest. Nothing came out. No employee spoke. No customer interrupted. The room simply watched. As Caleb and June were guided toward the entrance, he glanced once toward the hallway leading behind the hostess stand. A young employee hurried out of a small office. Something thin and black disappeared beneath her jacket. For only an instant, Caleb caught sight of it. A small ledger. Then she vanished through another doorway. The front door opened. Cold evening air rushed inside. Just before stepping onto the sidewalk, Caleb removed his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number from memory. The call connected almost instantly. His voice stayed perfectly even. "Denise." A short pause. "Initiate emergency lockdown." Another pause. "Freeze every cash transaction." His eyes never left the dining room. "Preserve every reservation record." The guard loosened his grip, suddenly uncertain. Caleb continued. "And lock all financial data until I arrive." He ended the call. Inside the restaurant, nobody yet understood what he had just done. Neither did June. She simply looked at her father, then back through the glass doors, where the young employee who had hidden the little ledger stood frozen in the hallway, clutching it tightly against her chest. A cold wind swept across the sidewalk, carrying the scent of rain and damp concrete. Cars rolled past, their headlights reflecting off the puddles gathered along the curb, while inside Copper and Pine, the warm lights still glowed as though nothing unusual had happened. June stepped closer to Caleb. "Dad." He slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket. "We're okay." She studied his face. Most fathers would have looked angry after being pushed out of a restaurant in front of strangers. Caleb didn't. He looked disappointed, not in himself, in something much bigger. June wrapped both hands around the old steel lunchbox. "You could have told them." "Told them what?" "That this place is yours." Caleb stared through the glass for a long moment before answering. "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" He smiled sadly. "Because I wasn't trying to find out how they treat the owner." He looked toward the empty tables still waiting inside. "I needed to see how they treat someone they believe has no power." June lowered her eyes. The answer settled quietly between them. Inside the dining room, the hostess had already returned to greeting new arrivals, her practiced smile back in place as if the last few minutes had never happened. Travis straightened his tie and spoke briefly with the security guard before pointing toward the entrance, making sure Caleb and June stayed outside. It all looked painfully routine. Too routine. Caleb had spent years repairing heating systems in old schools, libraries, and apartment buildings. Whenever a furnace failed, people usually blamed the loudest noise, but experience had taught him something different. The loud noise was almost never the real problem. The failure usually started somewhere no one bothered to look. He couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was exactly the same. June noticed him counting softly with his thumb against each finger. 1, 2, 3. The habit returned whenever he was studying how something worked. "You do that when you're thinking," she whispered. "I know." "What are you counting?" "Choices." She frowned. "Not people?" "No." He glanced back through the window. Every person inside is making one. A delivery van slowly pulled away from the loading area behind the restaurant. The older driver, Warren, paused before climbing inside. He looked across the parking lot until his eyes found Caleb. For a second, neither man spoke. Then Warren lifted the bottle of water Caleb had given him, just slightly, a silent thank you. Caleb answered with the smallest nod. Nothing more was needed. June watched the exchange. "You know him?" "I met him a long time ago." "Is he your friend?" Caleb thought about the question. Maybe tonight is the beginning of that. Before June could ask another question, Caleb's phone vibrated. Denise. He answered immediately. "It's done," she said. "The financial system is locked." No one can change reservation records now. The security cameras have already started backing everything up. Caleb closed his eyes for one brief second. Good. I'm on my way. Don't let anyone touch the office. I won't. The call ended. June tugged gently on his sleeve. Are we going home? Soon. But first. He looked through the front window one more time. I need to remember every face. Near the hallway, the same young employee appeared again. She glanced nervously toward Travis, then toward Caleb. The little black ledger was gone, hidden somewhere else now. Their eyes met for only an instant. Fear filled hers. Not the fear of being caught, the fear of finally understanding what she had been helping to protect. She quickly disappeared behind the office door again. Caleb exhaled slowly. There it is, he murmured. What? The first person who's beginning to tell herself the truth. June didn't fully understand, but she knew her father well enough to recognize that tone. It was the same quiet voice he used whenever he found the real crack hiding behind a freshly painted wall. Whatever happened next, it would not begin with anger. It would begin with the truth hidden inside that little black ledger. Caleb stood in the cold for another few seconds, watching the lights inside Copper and Pine shimmer through the rain-speckled glass. Then he rested a gentle hand on June's shoulder. Let's go home. She nodded without another question. The drive across Milwaukee felt unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while the heater hummed inside Caleb's aging pickup truck. June rested the steel lunchbox on her lap, tracing the dent in one corner with her thumb. Dad? Yeah? Did I do something wrong tonight? Caleb glanced at her before returning his eyes to the road. No, sweetheart. They didn't want us there. They didn't know us. June looked out the side window. I thought that would have made a difference. Caleb didn't answer right away. Sometimes the hardest truths deserved patience before they were spoken. They made a decision, he finally said, and someday they'll have to live with it. But you never let someone else's decision tell you who you are. She nodded slowly. The truck turned into a modest neighborhood on Milwaukee's south side, where small brick houses sat close together beneath old maple trees. Caleb parked beside a single-story home with peeling white trim and a porch light that always stayed on after sunset. Inside, everything felt familiar. The smell of coffee, the quiet ticking of an old wall clock, a folded blanket resting on the living room chair where Caleb's father usually spent his afternoons recovering from the stroke that had changed all of their lives 6 months earlier. Leon Whitaker had already gone to bed. His cane leaned against the hallway wall. Caleb smiled faintly when he saw it still standing exactly where June always reminded her grandfather to leave it. June carried the steel lunchbox into the kitchen and carefully placed it on the table. It wasn't an ordinary lunchbox. Years earlier, when daycare cost more than Caleb could afford, she had ridden beside him in his service truck during weekend repair calls. That little steel box had carried peanut butter sandwiches, apples, and sometimes only crackers if money was tight. Inside the lid, protected beneath a strip of clear tape yellowed with age, remained the crooked note June had written as a 5-year-old. Save me a seat, Dad? Caleb opened the lid gently. He smiled at the familiar handwriting before closing it again. Can I ask you something? June said. You always can. Why do you still keep that note? He leaned against the counter. Because there were days I couldn't promise you much. He looked toward the lunchbox. But I could always promise I'd come back for you. June walked over and hugged him without saying anything. For a moment, neither of them noticed the thick envelope lying beside the fruit bowl. Caleb finally reached for it. Several printed customer reviews spilled across the kitchen table. One retired school custodian claimed he had been told there were no tables available, while empty booths remained untouched for nearly 40 minutes. Another review came from a young mother who said her children were asked to wait outside, even though walk-in customers arriving later were seated first. A delivery driver wrote that employees treated him as though he were invisible. Different names, different weeks, the same pattern. Caleb spread the pages side by side. His years repairing heating systems had taught him something simple. 1 complaint could be an accident. 2 might be bad luck. A dozen nearly identical complaints meant there was a system hiding underneath. June watched him quietly. You've been reading those a lot. I have. Do you think they're true? Caleb rested his hand on the papers. I didn't want them to be. He looked toward the dark kitchen window where their reflections stared back at them. But tonight, his voice became almost a whisper. I stopped hoping they were wrong. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, the little steel lunchbox sat beside the growing stack of complaints, as though the promise written years ago had quietly become something much larger than a place at a dinner table. It had become a promise about what kind of place Copper and Pine was supposed to be. And by morning, Caleb knew he would have to face the painful possibility that somewhere along the way, that promise had begun to disappear. Sleep came late. Long after June had gone upstairs and the house had settled into silence, Caleb remained at the kitchen table beneath the soft glow of a single hanging light. The stack of customer complaints lay spread before him, each page carefully aligned, as though putting them in order might somehow make them easier to understand. Instead, the pattern only became clearer. Different names, different dates, the same feeling. Someone had walked through the front door hoping for a meal and left believing they simply didn't belong. Caleb rubbed his forehead. Years ago, before Copper and Pine had become more than an aging neighborhood diner, he had promised himself one thing. No one would ever leave feeling smaller than when they walked in. The old coffee maker hissed from the counter. He poured himself half a mug, but never took a sip. His eyes stopped on a faded photograph tucked inside the corner of a cookbook. It showed a younger Caleb standing beside the original owners of Copper and Pine, Frank and Louise Donnelly. Frank's arm rested proudly across Caleb's shoulders. Louise held a wooden spoon like it was a trophy. Caleb could still hear Frank laughing the day they handed him the keys. People don't remember every meal, the old man had said. They remember how you made them feel. At the time, Caleb had believed those words were simple. Now they felt painfully heavy. The hallway creaked. Leon Whitaker slowly emerged, leaning on his cane. The stroke had weakened one side of his body, but not the quiet wisdom in his eyes. Couldn't sleep? Leon asked. Caleb smiled faintly. I guess I got that from you. Leon lowered himself carefully into the chair across from him. Without asking, he looked over the complaints. He didn't need to read every page. The expression on Caleb's face already told the story. You found something. I found enough to worry me. Leon nodded. You remember your first winter fixing furnaces? Caleb chuckled softly. I remember every frozen basement. You always said the hardest part wasn't repairing the machine. It was convincing people the problem had been there long before it stopped working. Caleb looked down. I think that's what's happened here. Silence settled between them. Finally, Leon spoke again. When something breaks inside your own house, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You don't fix it because it's easy. You fix it because it's yours. Caleb stared at the complaints for another long moment. Then he gathered every page into one neat stack. I trusted Travis. I know. I thought giving him room to lead would help all of us. Leon smiled gently. Trust isn't a mistake. Keeping your eyes closed after the truth shows up is. The words stayed with Caleb. Across the room, June's steel lunchbox rested exactly where she had left it. Its dent caught the kitchen light. He walked over and opened it again. The small note inside had faded over the years. Save me a seat, Dad. His fingers brushed the paper lightly before he closed the lid. The promise wasn't only about saving a chair for June anymore. It was about making sure every honest person who stepped through Copper and Pine's doors could believe there was still a place waiting for them. His phone buzzed against the table. Denise. He answered immediately. I've finished securing the records, she said quietly. And? There are things you need to see. Her voice sounded tighter than before. The reservation logs don't match the register. Caleb didn't interrupt. And there are deposits that never reached the business account. He closed his eyes. How many? I'd rather show you than tell you. When? First thing in the morning. After the call ended, Caleb looked toward the dark window above the sink. The reflection staring back at him looked older than it had the day before. Not because of the gray beginning to show near his temples, because tomorrow would no longer be about finding out whether something was wrong. Tomorrow would be about discovering how many people had chosen to help keep it hidden. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of low gray clouds stretching over Milwaukee. The streets still shimmered from the night's rain as Caleb left the house before sunrise, with a travel mug of coffee resting in the cup holder beside him. June was still asleep. Before closing the front door, he had quietly looked into her room. She had fallen asleep hugging the old steel lunchbox, as though it were something worth protecting. In many ways, it was. Not because it was valuable, because it reminded him why copper and pine had ever existed. By the time Caleb reached the small corporate office attached to the restaurant's warehouse district, Denise Harper was already waiting. She had spent nearly 15 years balancing the books for copper and pine. Neat, careful, almost invisible. The conference room lights reflected off rows of printed reports spread across the table. Denise slid the first folder toward him. "I didn't touch anything after last night's lockdown." Caleb nodded. "Show me." She opened a spreadsheet. "These are Friday reservations." Another page followed. "And these are Friday receipts." At first glance, the numbers seemed ordinary. Then Denise pointed to several empty lines. These tables were reported as no-shows. Caleb frowned. "They ordered meals." "They did." She laid a second report beside it. "The payments never entered the restaurant account." "Cash?" Denise nodded. "Cash." Page after page revealed the same pattern. Reservations disappearing, walk-ins appearing, receipts missing, tables marked unavailable even while they generated sales. None of it was dramatic by itself. Together, it painted something impossible to dismiss. Caleb leaned back slowly. "How long?" "I can confirm at least 4 months." His jaw tightened. "I was afraid of that." Denise hesitated. There was something else. She reached beneath the stack and produced several printed customer emails. Not online reviews? Personal messages? One came from a retired postal worker celebrating 50 years of marriage. Another from a nurse whose family had driven across town after hearing how welcoming copper and pine used to be. Each message carried nearly the same sentence. "We didn't feel wanted." Caleb closed the folder. Those 5 words landed harder than any financial report. Money could be recovered. Trust was different. Denise watched him carefully. "I should have pushed harder." "You brought concerns." "I accepted Travis's explanations." "So did I." Silence settled over the room. Neither of them tried to place the blame entirely on the other. Leadership sometimes failed quietly before it failed publicly. A soft knock interrupted them. An IT technician stepped inside. "Mr. Whitaker?" The camera archive finished downloading. "Nothing has been deleted." "Good," Caleb answered. "Keep every file secured." The technician nodded and disappeared. Denise folded her hands. "What are you thinking?" Caleb stood and walked toward the office window overlooking the loading dock. 2 delivery trucks backed into their spaces. Kitchen employees laughed while unloading fresh produce. Business continued. Most of those people had no idea what had happened the night before. "They deserve the truth," Denise said. "They deserve fairness," Caleb corrected gently. "The truth comes after we know all of it." He turned back toward the table. "I'm not accusing everyone because of one manager. And if it's more than one?" His eyes drifted toward the stack of reports. "Then we'll face that too." His phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. Caleb answered. A nervous young woman's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Whitaker?" He recognized it immediately. "Mara?" "Yes." She took a shaky breath. "I still have the ledger." Caleb remained silent. "I almost turned it over to Travis after you left." Another pause. "But I couldn't." Outside the conference room window, a freight train rolled slowly through the warehouse district, its distant horn echoing across the morning air. Mara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you really want to know what happened inside Copper and Pine." She swallowed hard. "That little black book is only the beginning." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He simply looked across the conference room at Denise, whose expression had already changed. She reached for a legal pad without saying a word. "Mara," Caleb said calmly, "are you somewhere safe?" I think so." "You think?" "I'm sitting in my car behind a grocery store on South 13th. I left before anyone saw me." The fear in her voice didn't sound like someone worried about losing a job. It sounded like someone who had finally realized how far things had gone. "I don't want to do this over the phone," Caleb said. "Can you come here?" A long silence followed. "If I bring the ledger, you'll bring the truth." Another pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The call ended. Denise slowly lowered her pen. "She sounds terrified." "Because she is." "Do you trust her?" Caleb looked toward the rain-streaked window. "I don't know if I trust her." He paused. "But I believe she's reached the point where lying costs more than telling the truth." Outside, delivery trucks continued backing into loading docks, while warehouse workers hurried through the cold morning air. The city moved as if nothing had happened the night before. Inside the conference room, time felt different. Every minute mattered. Denise organized the reports into neat stacks. "If the ledger confirms cash was taken off the books, we'll have enough to begin an independent audit." Caleb nodded. "No shortcuts?" "None. And nobody gets accused until the facts speak for themselves." She smiled faintly. "That's why Frank trusted you with the restaurant." The mention of the former owner brought back a memory Caleb hadn't visited in years. The first week after buying Copper and Pine, he'd apologized to Frank for spending too much time checking invoices instead of greeting customers. Frank had laughed. "You know why I hired cooks before I hired another manager?" Caleb had shaken his head. "Because recipes are easier to replace than character." At the time, Caleb thought the old man was talking about hiring. Now he realized Frank had been talking about leadership. A knock sounded at the office door. The IT technician stepped back inside, carrying a flash drive. The overnight backup finished. He placed it carefully on the table. "Every camera angle from yesterday is preserved." "No missing files?" "None." Caleb thanked him. After the technician left, Denise looked at the small drive. "It's strange." "What is?" "People usually think the biggest danger is someone deleting evidence." Caleb picked up the drive. "But sometimes the biggest danger is believing no one will ever look." 25 minutes later, a silver sedan rolled quietly into the parking lot. A young woman stepped out. Her shoulders were tense. She clutched a canvas tote bag tightly against her chest. Mara. She hesitated before walking toward the office door, glancing behind her twice as though expecting someone to follow. Caleb opened the door before she reached it. "You made it." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry." He didn't respond. Not yet. Inside the conference room, Mara carefully placed the tote bag on the table. Her hands trembled as she unzipped it. The little black ledger appeared exactly as Caleb had seen it the night before. Its corners were worn. Several sticky notes protruded from the pages. It looked ordinary. Too ordinary to have carried months of quiet betrayal. "I wrote some of it," Mara admitted softly. "I hated myself every time." Denise opened to the first marked page. Rows of dates, table numbers, cash amounts, initials beside nearly every entry. Not just Travis, not just Sloan. Nearly every front-of-house employee working Friday and Saturday nights. Caleb slowly turned another page, then another. Each one made the pattern harder to deny. Mara swallowed, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "I kept telling myself it wasn't stealing." Her voice cracked. "I kept saying we were just doing things the way Travis wanted." She looked directly at Caleb for the first time. "But after watching your daughter standing outside those doors..." She closed her eyes. "I realized I'd stopped noticing the difference between following orders and becoming part of them." The room fell silent. No one reached for the next page, because everyone understood that what came after the ledger would no longer be about numbers. It would be about choices made by people who had convinced themselves those choices no longer belonged to them. Caleb closed the ledger without another word. He wasn't angry. That surprised Mara more than anything. She had expected shouting. She had prepared herself to be called a liar, a coward, or worse. Instead, Caleb quietly pushed a box of tissues across the table. "Take your time." She wiped her eyes. "I don't deserve your kindness." "This isn't kindness," Caleb answered gently. "It's respect." His words only made her cry harder. For nearly a minute, no one spoke. Outside the office window, a forklift beeped as it backed toward the loading dock. Workers unloaded fresh produce, laughing over something that had happened before sunrise. Life continued. Inside the conference room, it felt as though the room itself had stopped breathing. Finally, Denise broke the silence. "Tell us how it started." Mara stared at the worn black cover of the ledger. "It wasn't like this when I was hired." She swallowed. "At first, Travis only said we needed to protect the atmosphere." "What did that mean?" Caleb asked. "He said people paying for an experience shouldn't have to wait behind customers who only ordered coffee or shared meals." She looked ashamed, repeating the words aloud. "He called it protecting the room." Caleb remembered hearing that phrase once during a management meeting months earlier. At the time, it had sounded harmless. Now, it felt poisonous. "It changed little by little," Mara continued. "First we held a few tables. Then certain walk-ins waited longer. After that," she hesitated. "Cash started appearing." Denise leaned forward. "The envelopes?" Mara nodded. Guests who wanted immediate seating would leave cash. It never went through the register. Who decided where it went? Travis. And everyone knew? She looked down. Everyone working Friday and Saturday nights eventually figured it out. Caleb remained silent. Not because he didn't care, because every answer carried another weight. Did anyone object? For the first time, Mara looked directly at him. One dishwasher quit. A server transferred. Most of us, she stopped. Just got used to it. Those words lingered heavily in the room. Just got used to it. Caleb had heard similar sentences before, on construction sites where safety rules slowly disappeared, in apartment buildings where broken heaters were ignored because tenants had stopped complaining. Small compromises rarely announced themselves. They simply became normal. "And last night?" Caleb asked quietly. "What made you keep the ledger?" Mara took a shaky breath. "When your daughter dropped that lunchbox," she closed her eyes. "I saw the note. Save me a seat, Dad." I couldn't stop thinking about it. She looked toward Caleb. "My little brother used to wait for me after school every day because our mom worked double shifts." Her voice softened. "I remembered what it felt like when someone actually saved a place for you." She looked back at the ledger. "And then I watched Sloane push it away with her foot." The room grew still again. Denise slowly reached for another page inside the ledger. "This isn't just cash." Mara nodded. "No. There are initials beside some names." "What do they mean?" "Customers." "Regulars?" "No." She pointed to several entries. "W. L. F." Those weren't employees. They were people Travis told us to make wait. Caleb frowned. "Because of what?" "Their clothes." She forced herself to answer. "Their jobs. Sometimes because they came with children." The words landed like stones. Denise carefully turned another page. Near the back of the ledger, folded into one pocket, sat several handwritten notes. Reservation changes, cash totals, and one printed list. Caleb unfolded it slowly. It wasn't a schedule. It was a ranking of tables inside Copper and Pine. Beside each table was an expected spending amount. Every guest had quietly been measured before they ever sat down. Caleb looked at the paper for a long time. Then he folded it neatly and placed it back inside the ledger. "This restaurant was built one family at a time," he said softly. "No table was ever supposed to come with a price on someone's dignity." Mara lowered her head. "I know." "No." Caleb's voice remained calm. "You know it now." He stood and walked toward the conference room window. Beyond the glass, employees continued arriving for another day's work, completely unaware that before the sun set again, every decision they had made over the past 4 months would finally have to stand in the light. Caleb rested one hand against the cool glass. He remembered another morning years earlier, standing in almost the same place while construction crews removed the faded sign from the old diner he had scraped together enough money to buy. Back then, every dollar mattered. Every cracked chair had been repaired instead of replaced. Every gallon of paint had gone on the walls because Caleb had stayed after midnight with a roller in one hand and invoices in the other. He had never imagined that one day the building itself would be strong while its values quietly weakened. Behind him, Denise carefully closed the ledger. "What do you want to do first?" Caleb turned around. "Not what." She looked at him. "Who?" He picked up the printed complaints from the table. I want every complaint from the last 6 months, every email, every voicemail, every handwritten note. Denise nodded. I've already started collecting them, and I want to know which ones Travis marked as resolved. Her expression tightened. You think he buried them? I don't think anymore. The words landed softly. I need to prove it. Mara remained seated, twisting her hands together. I can tell you how he did it. Caleb looked toward her. He'd tell us to apologize politely at the front desk, then write customer misunderstanding in the report. And corporate? He said no one at corporate ever read them. Denise let out a slow breath. He was wrong. Caleb didn't smile. He was counting on everyone being too busy. A silence settled over the room before Mara spoke again. There was something else. She reached into her tote bag and removed a folded sheet of paper. I almost forgot. It was a weekly seating chart. At first glance it looked ordinary. Then Caleb noticed colored circles beside certain tables. Blue, yellow, red. What do they mean? He asked. Mara swallowed. Blue tables were for regulars Travis liked. Yellow tables were for people spending enough to raise the nightly average. And red? She hesitated. People we were supposed to delay. Caleb looked at the paper for a long moment. There are 12 red tables. They weren't tables. Mara shook her head. They were categories. She pointed toward a handwritten note. Delivery uniforms. Construction clothes. Families with small children. Anyone asking about sharing meals? Each phrase felt colder than the last. Denise quietly removed her glasses. I've worked in restaurants for 23 years. I've never seen something written down this openly. Mara's voice barely rose above a whisper. After a while, no one questioned it anymore. Caleb folded the paper with great care, not because it deserved protection, because evidence deserved respect. His phone buzzed. June. He answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Grandpa made oatmeal. Caleb smiled despite everything. Did he burn it this time? A tiny laugh came through the speaker. Almost. The sound filled the room with something none of them had expected. Normal life. Dad? Yes. Are you fixing the restaurant today? Caleb looked toward the ledger, the complaints, and the seating chart spread across the conference table. I'm trying. Will people be nice again? He closed his eyes for just a moment. That's the plan. Okay. I saved your lunchbox. His smile grew a little wider. I knew you would. After ending the call, he stood quietly for several seconds. Denise finally spoke. She believes you can fix this. Caleb looked toward the old lunch pail he had left beside his chair before entering the meeting. No, he said it gently. She believes people can choose to be better. He picked up his jacket. Now let's find out who still wants to make that choice. Outside, clouds slowly drifted apart as a thin beam of morning sunlight reached the copper and pine sign for the first time that day. Inside the restaurant across town, Travis Keene unlocked his office, unaware that every report he believed had disappeared was already waiting on Caleb's conference table, and that before another dinner service began, the story he had spent months controlling would no longer belong to him. He tossed his keys onto the desk and loosened his tie. Friday night had been unpleasant, but in his mind, it was already over. The man in the dusty work jacket had been nothing more than another customer who refused to accept being turned away. At least, that was the story Travis kept repeating to himself. He powered on his office computer. The screen remained black for several seconds before displaying a message he had never seen before. Account access. Temporarily suspended. His smile faded. He entered his password again. The same message appeared. A light knock sounded at the door. Sloane stepped inside, still carrying her morning coffee. Something's wrong. Travis looked up. My login's locked. She frowned. So is mine. He stood immediately. Probably an IT update. His voice sounded confident. His eyes did not. The dining room slowly came alive outside the office. Servers polished glasses. The kitchen filled with the smell of onions and butter. The opening staff meeting began exactly as it did every morning. Only this time, the whispers started before Travis walked onto the floor. Did you hear the registers went offline? They're saying accounting froze something. I heard corporates involved. Nobody knew the truth. Rumors filled the silence. Travis clapped his hands once. All right, everyone. His voice carried easily across the room. We've got a busy day ahead. Several employees nodded. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Mara's station remained empty. Travis noticed immediately. Has anyone seen Mara? No one answered. He pulled out his phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. A small knot formed in his stomach. Sloane leaned closer. Maybe she's sick. Maybe. But Travis no longer believed in convenient explanations. He dismissed the meeting and walked toward the hostess stand. Everything looked normal. Menus stacked neatly. Reservation tablet charging. Fresh flowers arranged near the entrance. Then he noticed something missing. The small notebook he normally kept beneath the counter. He bent down, opened every drawer. Nothing. His breathing slowed. Not because he was calm, because he was thinking. He replayed the previous night in his head. The delivery driver. The man in the dusty jacket. The little girl. The lunchbox. Mara disappearing down the hallway. His jaw tightened. He hurried back to the office and called Mara once more. Still nothing. Across town, Caleb sat quietly in the conference room while Denise projected reservation records onto a large screen. Every timestamp lined up with the security footage. Every missing payment corresponded with a handwritten note in the ledger. There was no longer a question of whether something improper had happened, only how many people had participated. Denise circled another transaction. This family paid in cash. The register shows they never arrived. Caleb compared the receipt with the seating chart Mara had brought. Red circle, delayed, moved, cash collected, record erased. The system had not been careless, it had been organized. He folded his hands. Call an independent auditor. Denise nodded immediately. They can be here by early afternoon. I don't want anyone from our regular accounting firm. You think people might already know each other? I don't know. He looked once more at the ledger. So we remove every doubt before anyone can question the outcome. His phone vibrated. Another unknown number. He answered. A hesitant male voice came through. Mr. Whitaker. Yes. My name is Eric. I work in your kitchen. Caleb listened. I wasn't part of what happened out front. I swear. I know. But I need to tell you something. Caleb reached for a pen. I'm listening. There are security cameras in the dining room. A pause. But there's another camera. One Travis told everyone stopped working months ago. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Where? In the hallway outside his office. It still records everything. The room fell silent. Denise slowly looked up from her notes. If Eric was telling the truth, then somewhere inside Copper and Pine sat another witness. One that had never accepted cash, never forgotten a face, and never learned how to lie. Caleb remained perfectly still. The conference room suddenly felt smaller. Denise slowly lowered her pen. Eric, Caleb said into the phone, are you absolutely certain? Yes, sir. The installer told us months ago that camera was being replaced. Travis said it never worked again. But I've seen the little green light on more than one morning. Nobody ever checked because everyone believed him. Caleb glanced toward Denise. For the first time since the investigation began, something stronger than suspicion entered the room. Verification? Can you get to it? I don't think so. Eric's voice dropped. The office stays locked. But the recorder isn't inside. Caleb frowned. Where is it? In the maintenance closet beside the hallway. The same closet where the network equipment is. Denise immediately pulled up the building blueprint stored on her laptop. There it is. She pointed to a narrow storage room tucked behind the manager's office. It shares the same recording rack as the security system. Caleb thanked Eric. Don't touch anything. I won't. And don't tell anyone we spoke. Yes, sir. The call ended. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Denise quietly said, If that recorder still has yesterday's footage. It won't just confirm what happened to us, Caleb replied. It'll confirm what happened to everyone. She immediately contacted the independent auditor, requesting that a digital forensics technician join the team. No one opens that equipment room until they're here, she said after hanging up. Caleb nodded. We're not giving anyone a reason to question the evidence. Across town, Travis paced inside his office. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Accounting, ignored. Corporate, ignored. Then another notification appeared. Emergency audit team scheduled. Arrival 2 p.m. His stomach tightened. He opened the office safe. Personnel folders. Deposit slips. Spare keys. Everything looked untouched, yet something felt terribly wrong. He opened the bottom drawer. Empty. The ledger was still gone. He slammed the drawer shut harder than he intended. Outside, Sloane watched him through the half-open office door. She had never seen him nervous before. "Travis?" He looked up too quickly. "What?" "Customers are asking why the reward system isn't working." "It'll be fixed." "What should I tell them?" "Tell them the truth." She blinked. "What truth?" He hesitated, then forced a smile. "Tell them we're updating the computers." She nodded and walked away. The moment she disappeared, Travis locked the office door. His hands shook as he searched every cabinet one more time. He wasn't looking for money. He was looking for control. At the corporate office, the auditor arrived carrying 2 hard cases filled with forensic equipment. A gray-haired woman introduced herself as Laura Mitchell. "I understand we're preserving evidence, not drawing conclusions." "Exactly," Caleb answered. She smiled slightly. "Good. Evidence tells better stories than assumptions." Together, they drove toward Copper and Pine. The closer they came, the quieter the truck became. June's steel lunchbox still rested on the back seat, where Caleb had placed it before leaving home. At a stoplight, his eyes caught the dent along one corner. He remembered June tracing it with her finger the night before. He remembered the note inside. "Save me a seat, Dad." The words no longer reminded him only of his daughter. They reminded him of every customer who had walked through those doors hoping there would be a place for them. When they pulled into the restaurant parking lot, lunch service had already begun. Guests chatted over sandwiches. Servers carried trays through the dining room. From the outside, Copper and Pine looked exactly as it always had. Warm. Inviting. Ordinary. Only Caleb knew that within the next hour, one forgotten security camera might reveal whether the building had simply housed a few bad decisions, or whether an entire culture had quietly learned to look away. The lunch crowd barely noticed when 3 unfamiliar people walked through the front doors. Caleb led the way, without hurry. Denise walked beside him, carrying a locked case of financial records. Behind them came Laura Mitchell, the independent forensic auditor, her company badge clipped neatly to her jacket. She wasn't there to accuse anyone. She was there to preserve facts before anyone could change them. Conversations around the dining room continued. Forks tapped against plates. Coffee steamed beneath hanging lights. The smell of grilled onions drifted from the kitchen exactly as it had every afternoon since Copper and Pine first opened. Travis spotted them almost immediately. For a brief second, surprise crossed his face. Then it disappeared beneath a practiced smile. "Caleb?" He stepped forward with both hands open. "I wish you'd called first. I wanted to see things exactly as they were." Travis forced a small laugh. "I think last night got a little emotional." "No." Caleb's voice remained calm. It became honest. The words hung quietly between them. Several nearby servers slowed their pace without appearing to watch. Sloane froze behind the hostess stand, pretending to straighten menus she had already arranged twice. Laura introduced herself. "I'm here on behalf of an independent audit." Travis glanced toward Denise. "You didn't think to discuss this with me?" Denise answered before Caleb could. "The purpose of an independent audit is that it doesn't begin with discussion." Travis's smile tightened. "This is going to scare the staff." Caleb looked around the dining room. If the truth frightens someone, the truth isn't the problem. Without another word, Laura requested access to the network room. "It's just a maintenance closet," Travis replied quickly. "I'll have someone unlock it." "I'd prefer the manager do it personally," Laura said. Her tone remained polite. It also left no room for argument. As they walked down the narrow hallway, Caleb noticed familiar details he hadn't paid attention to in months. The framed photographs of neighborhood charity dinners, the polished brick walls, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen. Everything looked exactly as he had imagined when he built the restaurant. Only now he couldn't stop wondering how many families had walked past these same walls believing they weren't welcome. They stopped outside the maintenance closet. Travis unlocked the door. Inside, metal shelves held cleaning supplies, spare light bulbs, router equipment, and a locked recording cabinet. Laura knelt beside it. The seal hasn't been broken. She photographed it before opening the cabinet. A small recorder blinked steadily. One tiny green light, still recording. Eric had been right. Laura carefully removed the hard drive. No one touches this until we've made a forensic copy. Travis folded his arms. So all of this is because one customer complained? Caleb met his eyes. No. It's because too many stopped believing anyone would listen. The hallway fell silent. Laura connected the recorder to a portable imaging device. Numbers began scrolling across the screen as the data copied sector by sector. No files deleted, she murmured. No interruptions. She looked up at Caleb. The archive is intact. Denise slowly released the breath she had been holding. Travis shifted his weight. You'll see this was all a misunderstanding. No one answered. Minutes later, the first copied video opened on Laura's laptop. The timestamp matched the previous evening. There was the hostess stand. There was Warren carrying the heavy crates. There was Caleb offering him his own bottle of water. The camera had no sound. It didn't need any. Body language told the story. Travis stepped toward Warren. Warren lowered his head. The security guard moved closer. June reached for her father's sleeve. Then came the moment that froze the room. The footage showed Sloane accepting a white envelope from the well-dressed guest. Only seconds later, she led the family directly to one of the supposedly reserved tables. Laura paused the video. No one spoke. The image remained frozen on the screen. An empty table. A hidden envelope. A choice made in plain sight. Then Laura advanced the recording another few minutes. A young employee hurried from the office carrying a small black ledger beneath her jacket. Mara. Caleb recognized the exact moment he had glimpsed her through the dining room window. The forgotten hallway camera had captured everything from a different angle. Not rumors, not opinions. Just moments exactly as they had happened. Laura quietly closed the laptop. I believe we've preserved enough to continue the investigation. Caleb looked down the hallway toward the busy dining room. For months, people had hidden behind explanations. Now the facts were beginning to speak for themselves. And before the afternoon was over, everyone who had chosen silence would have to decide whether they were finally ready to find their own voice. Laura carefully sealed the copied hard drive inside an evidence bag and signed across the label. No one opens this without the investigation present, she said. Caleb nodded. Thank you. She looked directly at him. From this point on, every decision needs to be documented. It will be. The three of them stepped back into the hallway. Lunch service continued only a few yards away, but the atmosphere had shifted. Servers smiled at customers. They refilled coffee. They carried plates as though nothing had changed. Yet every pair of eyes seemed to drift toward Caleb before quickly looking away. They knew. Not everything. Just enough to understand that something they had always assumed would stay hidden had suddenly come into the light. Travis tried one last time to regain control. Everyone, he called across the dining room, forcing confidence into his voice. Corporate is conducting a routine systems review. Please stay focused on your guests. A few employees nodded automatically. Others didn't move. Caleb noticed Eric standing near the kitchen pass. The young line cook met his eyes for only a second before returning to his station. Fear still lived there, but so did relief. At the hostess stand, Sloane rearranged reservation cards that no longer mattered. Her hands trembled just enough for Caleb to notice. She had always believed confidence looked like certainty. Today, it looked fragile. Denise quietly handed Caleb another folder. I found something while we were waiting for the forensic copy. He opened it. Inside were printed records of customer complaints. Each carried a handwritten note at the bottom. Resolved. Guest misunderstood policy. No staff action required. Caleb flipped through them one after another. Different names. The same conclusion. Every complaint had died before reaching anyone who could investigate. He stopped at one particular page. A construction worker had written that his teenage son left in tears after being laughed at for asking whether they could split a meal. The date caught Caleb's attention. 3 weeks earlier. He looked toward Travis. "Did you read these yourself?" Travis shrugged. "My assistant summarized them." "So you signed reports without speaking to the guests?" "We trusted the information we had." Caleb's voice remained calm. "You trusted the version that protected you." No one answered. Just then, the front door opened. An elderly couple stepped inside, shaking rain from their jackets. The hostess instinctively reached for 2 menus. Then she froze. She looked toward Travis, then toward Caleb. Neither man said a word. For the first time in months, she had to decide without someone telling her what kind of customer stood before her. The silence stretched. Finally, she forced herself to smile. "Welcome to Copper and Pine. Table for 2?" The couple smiled back. "Please." She seated them at the nearest available table. No hesitation, no questions, no envelope. Caleb watched quietly. It was only one small choice, but every broken culture began changing the same way it had once broken. One decision at a time. Laura leaned close enough that only Caleb could hear. "Interesting." "What is?" "The moment people realize someone is finally watching." She glanced around the dining room. "They often become the people they always knew they should have been." Caleb looked across the room. "I don't want people acting differently because I'm here." "What do you want?" He thought of June, of the steel lunchbox waiting at home, of the faded note folded beneath its lid. "I want them to act this way after I leave." Before Laura could answer, Denise's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen, then at Caleb. "It's Warren." "The delivery driver," Caleb answered immediately. "Warren?" The older man's voice sounded uncertain. "I wasn't sure if I should call." "You did. I found something in my truck after I got home." "What is it?" "A receipt. I almost threw it away." Caleb waited. "It isn't mine. It's for one of those cash payments." A long pause followed. "And the signature at the bottom," Warren swallowed, "doesn't belong to a customer." Caleb's eyes slowly lifted toward Travis, who stood only 20 feet away, pretending to review the lunch schedule. The investigation had started with a hidden ledger. Then came the reservation records. Then the forgotten camera. Now another piece had surfaced from the one person everyone inside the restaurant had believed was too unimportant to matter. And Caleb realized the truth was no longer searching for witnesses. The witnesses were beginning to find the truth. When I think back on this story, I don't remember the moment Caleb froze the restaurant. I remember the old steel lunchbox and the little note inside that read, "Save me a seat, Dad." In the end, that promise became much bigger than a chair at a table. It became a promise that no decent person should ever be made to feel they don't belong. This story reminds us that dignity isn't measured by what someone can afford, but by how we choose to treat them when we believe they have nothing to offer us. The cost of forgetting that truth is far greater than losing money. It is losing the kind of people we were meant to become. Today, pay attention to the next person who walks into your life quietly. Offer a smile, hold a door, or simply make room for them the way Caleb always hoped his restaurant would. Sometimes, the smallest act of respect is the one another person remembers for the rest of their life. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments so I know Caleb's journey stayed with you, and tell me this. Have you ever been judged before someone even knew your name? I'd truly like to read your story. Stay close, because in our next story, one ordinary act of courage will change a family's future in a way no one sees coming.